Cool. All right, well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the next edition of your favorite internet webinar. Wait, are we in balance? That's right, it's a titillating topic today. We're gonna have fun, we're gonna enjoy it, and I hope everyone at home does too, or wherever you are. So let's get right to it. Attendee control panel on the right side of your screen on GoToWebinar, depending on whatever device you're on, iPad, iPhone, tablet, computer, you'll see this little bar. If you want to ask questions, please feel free to do so. There's a questions tab within there. It's like the third or fourth one down, depending on what you're looking at. You can ask a question, and our friend Steven, super producer to the stars, will be answering those questions today, as Chris and I will be focusing every second on weight and balance. As we all know, this is the only way to make this exciting. So let's go with the intros. I'm Pablo Morelia, Senior Director of Flight Training Technology, and I work on all tech-related items within the You Can Fly Academy at AOPA, including the app that I constantly plug, in-cockpit training app. That has gone live as of Monday, and I'll leave it at that for now. Chris?
Well done, Pablo. And let me just say, I can't wait to start this webinar.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic.
I know that was a good one. I was really working on that one hard for a couple of weeks. But anyway, my name is Chris Moser. I'm the Senior Director of Flight Training Education here at AOPA, and I work with flight schools and CFIs. And I know we've already introduced Steven, but Steven, make sure you say hi.
Oh, hello. Happy to be here with this heavy topic we're working on today.
Well done. We work on these things, by the way. Okay. All right, so a couple of reminders. We get this question asked all the time. And yes, you're eligible, as the logo on the bottom right and the top bullet says. Wings credit for this webinar you will get. If you signed up, it'll go to the email address that you signed up for. We're also available on the AOPA Live YouTube channel, where you would find all your great content from AOPA. And even though it's the AOPA Live YouTube channel, you'll see all of the webinars for AOPA there. And so when you get to that channel, if you can't find us, just look for the Don't Get Rusty webinar series. And lastly, there's the webinars page at AOPA. So if you go to aopa.org, you can actually find it by searching for Don't Get Rusty, or you can go to the address on the screen of webinars.aopa.org.
Beautiful. Well done. Well done, Pablo.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right. So why are we doing this? Why is this even a topic? I don't have to do it, right? Who cares about weight balance? Not true. Naughty. So this first picture here will get us into some of the reasons why we're doing this. If you look at this picture, you don't notice it right off the bat, but if you look closely, and I don't know if you could see it remotely, but right here appears to be the end of the runway. This is a fully loaded 747 with, quite noticeably, the mains still apparently touching the ground at the end of the runway. Chris,
so
what do you think?
Are they landing backwards on the, are they either they're landing backwards or they're taking off really late? Which one is it?
Yeah, exactly. So the reason we put this on here is because it wasn't intentional from the story we heard, and we actually heard from the pilot of this. We're not supposed to mention his name, so we won't. But this was a 747 departing LAX for Charles de Gaulle Paris. They were 40,000 pounds overweight due to a cargo loading error. This is one of those things where you could say, you know, what could have happened, what didn't happen, right? Everything worked out fine, and this was a successful flight. However, that's why weight and balance is important, right? For many reasons we'll get to later. You know, don't leave it to other people, do it yourself, make sure it's right. All right.
Exactly.
So now,
I mean, think about it. I just can't even imagine that crew barreling down that runway, you know, thinking, doing all their calculations, everything looks good, and man, they get down there and they're still trying to rotate and get off the ground.
And you know, the only thing I can connect this to something very similar is something like with density altitude. I know I've been down the runway a lot longer ways, and I was like, come on, baby, get off the ground, right? But yeah, I can't even imagine that. So we're gonna go to the next one here, which is a little more serious. And this is one that did not end well. And I think probably everybody has seen this one. And it's a 747 cargo flight out of Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. So I'll run it and we can just watch what happens here. So the plane's taken off. You can see that it's pretty nose high here, and it looks like it is stalling. Right wing stalls, and essentially out of control at this point. There's nothing that they could do, and that was it. So now this isn't a weight balance calculation error so much as it's an example of why weight and balance is so important.
Right.
And so,
Dan, and I remember what happened, right? It was the story. It's like there was something, you knew what it was on board, right? The strap broke and the part of the cargo moved.
There was supposedly, from everything I looked at, there was 5 combat ambush vehicles weighing a total of 80 tons on this plane. That's what I read. And at least one of them, the last one, broke off because it wasn't secured correctly, which shifted all the way to the back. It hit the rear bulkhead. It damaged some parts, did all kinds of stuff. But essentially, regardless if it would have broken hydraulic lines or anything, when you've got that much weight shifting all the way to the back, nose goes up, you're stalling, right? And if they were only, from what I understand, they were only 1,200 feet off the ground. I don't fly 747s, but I'm assuming a 747 that stalls at 1,200 feet, it's going to be really hard to get it going again. So again,
you can even kind of tell there too. It's like I can imagine, and I know I read it somewhere, but I think they were obviously pushing forward elevator, but because of the big weight shift, they didn't have enough authority to be able to get the nose down. So just terrifying.
Yeah, and so obviously we've gone from something that worked out to something that didn't. So that's why we're doing this today. I mean, weight balance is important, regardless of regulations or personal opinions, right? It's an important thing to calculate.
Yep.
Okay, let's roll the poll.
Got a nice poll here. Why does weight and balance calculations, or who does them when carrying extra passengers or cargo? How about you, Pablo? What would you answer on this one?
Well,
all the time. Carrying something
if we're
outside?
honest here, I don't do it all the time. For the most part, I fly solo, and I think from the history here, and if people, we have a lot of repeat customers, they'll know that I fly solo a lot and I fly long distance, right? But for me, it would be honestly, if I'm going a long way, it's a combination of when I'm carrying something outside the norm and I'm going a long way because, and we'll cover this a little later with fuel and stuff like that. But a couple of trips I've done with my wife, we've got 3 of her bags, 2 dogs, a cat, 2 cages, her, and fuel. So, well, listen.
I'm hoping you're doing weight and balance on that whole.
Oh yeah.
You call that a cornucopia of cargo? I mean.
Oh man. Well, and I think we do cover it later, which is in one of the calculations, which is also where does it go, right? You just don't throw it all in the plane and say I'm at weight. So there's a couple other calculations there too. All right, so
it looks like you got a pretty good response there. Look at, we got 76% in, 60% saying when carrying something outside the norm, 38% all the time. We can actually show the results there, I think, Stephen. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, I like it.
Look at that.
All the time. Yeah. That's cool. And you know what?
That's awesome
because that's the way it should be, right? Now, granted, I think you probably get into the Ford Chevy, which is better at this point all the time. Well, I mean, I think a combination of those is pretty good. What do you think, Chris? I mean, good answer.
I'd say, and of course, I'm kind of a different part in this because pretty much all the flying I do is when I'm instructing. And so if I get a new student, then I'll do a weight and balance to make sure we're good. After that, I don't do it. It's like we're going to 172. I know it's going to be the same every time unless we take additional cargo or something. So I tend to do that more when I'm carrying something outside the norm because of what I do. But I will say, when I used to fly freight, we were required. I had to do it every leg, and of course, if you saw the cargo sometimes, like I remember flying some of the stuff, and I was working for the freight carrier would come over, and I remember them shoving boxes, and so I had to really pay attention to like making sure that it was like I knew the weight of the crate, and I had to make sure that I was telling them where to load it. It was something. So yeah, that we did weight and balance every leg, but for the regular flying on 172 with one person, a student that I fly with all the time, I can't say that I do that.
So Chris, it looks like there's actually a pretty good question here that I think we'll just cover it right away before I forget it. But you see that if I'm ramp checked Part 91 by FAA, am I required to provide a weight and balance, or is it only required that I've made one for my own use? It's a good question.
Good. And so in fact, I know that's coming up on a slide shortly, right? We're gonna talk a little bit about that. So yeah, yep. we'll hit that one shortly.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay.
It is a really good one.
All right, so let's get out of Bagram and talk about something real funny real quick, which is hopefully leads us to the rest of this. Is it is important, but I think in this case I laughed because it was late. I think it was like 2 a.m. many delays, and you know, I commuted weekly from Chicago to Frederick, and one night coming back to Chicago, I was on a not to be mentioned carrier that it was like a half full flight, and I obviously was in the middle seat next to two people. I'm like, are you kidding me? So as the as the flight attendant came by, I said, can I move? You know, because there was like I think 3 empty rows on the other side, right? So I just wanted to move one row up to the window, and she said no, because it would throw off the weight and balance. I really appreciated that because it was safety to the 12th degree, right? So that was really nice. Anyway, let's move on. I laughed. I did. I said, okay.
Were you carrying a lot of books with you or something? Or
Yeah, my bag was too big. That's exactly what it was. All right. So why do we do it? Why do we do regs?
well, I mean, right here you got the basic idea, and it's going to answer the question. I'm not sure whose it was, but that idea of are you required? And you can see right here, while except as provided, there is like in the good end, it was at 91, I think, .1 that says all available information, all that sort of stuff, but it doesn't necessarily specifically require weight and balance. But here it says no person may operate a civil aircraft without complying with the operating limitations in the AFM or the POH. This kind of similar thing. And of course, weight and balance is in there, right? So
Yep.
it's basically, are you within weight and balance? So in terms of the FAA showing up, as long as you can prove that you were within weight and balance, you don't necessarily have to have the weight and balance calculation done. So for example, flying on 72 with one person, and you've done it before, you should be covered. It's not going to be an issue. Yeah. However, I think we had isn't there the one thing though? However, I believe I was going to mention this here. I don't recall. But the one thing to remember, never mind, we actually have this coming up in a poll question. I'm not going to say what I was going to say. I'm going to leave that alone.
All right, we'll move on.
I'm leaving that thought.
Okay. So why do it? Well, I think we're going to ask the why do it many times. We've stated why we're doing this podcast, or I'm sorry, webinar. And so we'll cover these in a lot of these slides up ahead as to the specific reason why we're doing it. And in this case, we're going to talk about why we're doing it for safety. So I think one of these things, go ahead.
I was going to go ahead and make your point, because I was just going to go and review some of the stuff that's
I was going to talk about a little of this, which was we had someone come into our airport and they just bought a new Cirrus and they porpoised it down the runway. It had to do with speed and other things, but I do believe there was an issue with weight as well. They were new to the airplane. They really didn't know how to fly it. And when they landed, they did a prop strike and they got their free engine overhaul from the insurance company. And so, you know, there's a lot of reasons, and that's also safety, right? Because it was only a prop strike, but it could have been worse. But
right.
So one of the reasons why we're doing this.
And not to mention the fact, I mean, that kind of porpoising type of thing can quickly turn from a prop strike into, I've seen airplanes with a nose wheel pushed up, bending the firewall, so they can get dangerous really quick to, in fact, departing and ground looping or worse. So the things I just wanted to show on here, and by the way, these are courtesy of Rod Machado's Private Pilot Handbook. I just happen to have that here. Look at that. I know that it's a big surprise to our usual listeners. But anyway, I think these graphics were kind of good the way he showed them. And it's basically, if you are too aft in your CG loading, then you can have a situation where the airplane becomes unstable. And so it's like you might go into a stall situation and not have enough elevator to recover from it. There are some benefits to being towards the aft legal limit, because you get a little less drag from the airplane and you get better performance. But if you go beyond that aft CG loading, it's going to be really light on the controls and you may not be able to control it. And then on the flip side, being too forward, you could end up not having enough elevator authority to get the nose up. So while it would be stable in a stall situation, you might come into land and not be able to land on the mains and hit on the nose wheel, porpoise it like that. The person that you saw that happened with the Cirrus, unfortunately.
Well, now, and the other thing I wanted to add too is, you know, these things are in flight from what we saw in the first picture and in the background video. I mean, weight is so important. You might not even get off the ground. I mean, I mean, you could stall right off the takeoff and you'll never get the nose back down if you're too far aft. If you're too far forward, you'll never get off the ground. I mean, right? Because you won't be able to pull back. So, I mean, this isn't just in flight, right? There's a lot of things that come into play with this. And I think I mentioned earlier with density altitude, I mean, these things are even magnified in those situations. So really, safety is the number one here, but these things are both on the ground and in the air. Oops.
Yes, totally agree. And you're right, exactly the point. I know I'll mention it later too, that in fact, I have it on the next slide here. Remember that the performance charts, all that stuff for takeoff, landing distance, being able to brake, all that's based on the weight. And it's like at max gross weight is the key, and then the temperatures and everything else. So it's like if you're above that, then who knows what that airplane's going to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So what other implications do we have, Pablo? What else could happen to us if we were like overweight?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Other than an accident, sure, you've got to deal with legal issues, right? And so one of them would be the FAA, which is probably the biggest one because they control our certificates. But then other than that is, even if you don't get in trouble by them, what if you don't have insurance?
Right.
I mean, the accident.
I spoke to someone in the insurance industry, and it's not, like they kind of gave me the general idea. There's not really necessarily an official answer because they handle things on a case-by-case basis. But what they said was, if you were over by a couple of pounds, like you made an error in your calculation and maybe there was a little more fuel on board than you realized, and you had an accident and you were slightly over, they said they're likely they're going to cover the accident and it's probably nothing's going to happen. Now, if you had multiple accidents, then and every time you were overweight, now this is where you're going to face consequences. But if you were egregiously, like they could tell you were purposely overweight, then it's possible that they may deny number one, drop you from your policy. They may get you on potentially not covering the accident because you were outside of limitation. So there's some big consequences here for not following the rules. And so it's like the number one thing, of course, is safety. Like, be safe.
Yeah.
That's what we all care about. But then you've got other consequences that could happen too, and we don't want to do that. That's not cool. We want to keep flying.
No, right. No, that's exactly right. I mean, that's, I think, one of the things is we get kind of narrow thought processes on certain things, like, oh, it's just weight and balance, or this and that. And that's what the next slide shows actually is, this kind of thing where in my situation, again, I do fly alone a lot, but if I fly with a friend, depending how far I'm going, usually I'm in a 182, and you don't think about it, but then when you do, you're like, this could be an issue, right? So the 182 that I fly holds 90 gallons of fuel. Big deal. It's a lot. It can get me further than my bladder can go, right? However, 90 gallons of fuel, it's 6 pounds per gallon. It's almost 600 pounds, right, of something.
That's a
now
ton
that I'm weighing.
Of weight.
Well, not exactly a ton. It's about a half ton. No, quarter ton. So, right.
But, so yeah. And on the 182, like, what's the fuel capacity on this too? It's like 70 some gallons. Does it go up to 90?
Well, on a 182,
how much?
It's 90.
90.
Holy cow. 45
Okay.
side. Yeah, and so that's a lot of weight, and at least the one that we fly. So that's huge. Now, and the other consideration when you think about this is not only do I have that much weight on board, but even if I'm alone, I have to take consideration, and it's not like a paper you're going to fill out, but you have to take into consideration what happens during the flight. And this has happened, right? Airplanes aren't perfect. You have to keep an eye on your fuel burn. Is it left and right tank? Is it both? There's been times, and one time I had it where it just wasn't feeding out of both tanks. It seemed to do the left one more than the right. And when I say more, I was down to, like, I'd used at least a quarter of that tank, or more than a third of that tank actually on the left than I had on the right. So I was down to about 30 gallons on the left and 45 on the right. Not a huge issue yet. I still had like a 2-hour flight left, right? So I can equal that out. But had I not noticed that, I could have been down to 15 gallons on the left with 45 on the right. Now what are we doing, right? Now we're causing all kinds of issues in flight, on landing, right? Final, actual, all that stuff. So it could get out of hand.
Yeah, and not to mention, and by the way, just a quick plug for a future, I think coming up in March, we're actually going to do a Don't Get Rusty on fuel systems and how to manage it. So that kind of thing doesn't happen, because you're exactly right. Too much weight that way, and you may not have enough aileron authority to level it out as you need to. So yeah, totally.
Yep.
There's a rule of thumb here I found as well when we were doing some of the research for this thing, and it gives you an idea. And again, this is a rule of thumb. You want to use your performance charts in the airplane flight manual or the POH, but the rule of thumb says that a 10% change in weight will cause at least a 20% change in takeoff and landing distance. So that, more weight requires more runway, and that's both for takeoff and for landing. And so if you figure, every time you add 10% of weight on, take that distance for takeoff and landing and increase it by 20, and that is kind of even a little conservative, because in the article, and I have the link down there if you want to go look that one up, it was from Plane and Pilot magazine, top 10 rules of thumb. it said that they did a analysis of some Cessnas and Pipers, the typical like a Piper Warrior, a 172, and they found that it was more like 25% increase in takeoff and landing distances when you add weight. So weight makes a big deal. And in fact, one of the things, if you've never done it, one tip that I'll give you is that if you have never flown, especially if you're new in training or if you've never just done any flying with the airplane fully loaded, you might want to go up with a CFI and do that, because I often will do that with my students as we get closer to check ride. We get the opportunity, we'll stick somebody in the back just so they can feel it, because I know the first time I ever landed, having just gotten my private, and we had these two big guys with us, and it was like we came in and I went to flare and I just smacked into the runway, because I was so used to, I only had to pull back this much. You have to pull back a bit more to get it all, it's a runway. So it was that was a whole shocking or jarring thing. By the way, we do have a question I see here. It says, as a CFI, do you allow a primary student to skip across weight and balance or anything else while going down the pre-taxi checklist? So for me personally, generally no. I have to admit, I'm not always as disciplined in the sense of the getting ready to get that weight and balance done every time, because after a while, once they get it, it's the same every time. But I do emphasize the fact that we considered it and we definitely talk about it, but we know it's 172, it's full fuel, it's the two of us as always. So unless they've eaten a huge turkey or something before we went, it's not going to change. But it is really important that you practice it. So as a CFI, what I do is I periodically make sure that they do it, to make sure, once they've gotten proficient at it the first time, and they show me proficiency, then do that. So it is important. It's something we want to build a habit, and we definitely want to consider it. So,
and I think as we go here, one of the things you just mentioned, Chris, that's really important is the fact that this is not standard for anything. All planes are different.
Yep.
That's why that POH is really the key here. Rules of thumbs and increasing, takeoff and landing distances. Those are also different. I mean, it could be like it says at least 20%. That's right. It's at least. For some planes, some Pipers might go to 25. A Cirrus might go longer, and so.
Right.
There's so many differences to these things. Please, whatever you do, these are rules of thumbs. Take them for definitions that we'll do later. Take them as the big picture, and then go to your POH and plug those into that POH.
Yeah, really good point. And that's, I think, what they even said in the article was that, this is just a rule of thumb, and it's like they showed just an example of stuff where it does get longer. Yeah. We had one person here says you could mention, density altitude. Obviously, density altitude, if you throw this in, that just makes all of this worse. So it's like we weren't necessarily going to talk about density altitude today, but I totally agree with you. It's Fabio that said this. Yeah, very much so. It would just complicate, add more on for this. It's going to make it even worse if you have density altitude and high temps.
Well, and the thing about density altitude too is, I know this isn't what it's about, but if you're not overweight in Illinois, and you take off, you're fine. That same weight in Denver, you're going to feel like you're overweight because the end of the runway is going to appear much more quickly than it does in Illinois. Trust me on this.
Absolutely.
I've done it. Right? There's over 5,000 feet difference between altitudes there. So that's actually one way to maybe test your weight and balance without being overweight. Just go to Denver. All right.
All right, let's go.
All right, so
okay.
let's get some definitions, huh?
All right, go for it. Go for it, Daryl.
All right, well, I'm just going to read it. So the arm, right, other than having two, and I mentioned this to Chris yesterday as we're preparing for this, it's funny because I think one of the good things about this webinar is as we create them, we're often reminded of the things that maybe we forgot because, to actually, and we'll talk about some of the tools later, they're just tools. And so you just fill in numbers, but these are the actual definitions to those words in those apps. And in this case, other than knowing I had a left and a right arm, I was like, I couldn't have given you this definition just off the top of my head if you asked me yesterday. So the horizontal distance is the arm from the reference datum, which we will cover in a minute, to an item's center of gravity. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
And go ahead, and we mentioned the moment, which we have the equation down below there, weight times arm equals moment. The big thing here that I like this graphic, and I will use this when I'm initially teaching somebody weight and balance, is it's this idea of like the teeter-totter. It's like the seesaw, right? So whatever you like to call it. And if you have a little kid and an adult on the two ends of the teeter-totter, it's not going to work out, and you've got to then adjust how far it is. And what we're really doing in the airplane is like that seesaw in the air. You've got, where it's actually not just that it just flies, but we're actually sitting, and if almost like if you took the fulcrum and put it on top, it's the center of lift that the airplane's hanging on, and you've got the stuff in the front of the airplane, like the engine typically, and then you've got the tail down force and any loading that happens that's going to adjust this teeter-totter like this. And so it's all about finding the right balance that's within control limits. So that's where just these concepts of knowing arm and moment, and that something heavy pushed farther back is going to have more leverage than something closer to the center. So that can help you in the sense of where am I going to load things. Even just eyeballing it at first before you even put the numbers in to calculate. Obviously, once you do that, then calculate and see if you're within limits. But it's important because, as we're going to see here, I think on the next one, there are limits where these fall. And to be safe, to have control authority, you can see right there that CG range in the graph. This is from the pilot's handbook. That CG range, it's like it's a relatively, and that's probably even exaggerated, honestly. It's a relatively small range that we're safe in an airplane, and anything outside of that, you're now becoming a test pilot, you know. And
well, let's just read it in case people can't see it. The mass center of gravity is the mass center of an aircraft, the point where it would balance if you suspended it, usually expressed in inches from a reference datum. Oh my goodness, what's a datum? That's twice we've heard that. An imaginary vertical plane. Okay, so not every airplane is at the same datum, has the same one, which all measurements of arm are taken. Points forward of the datum have negative arms, points aft are positive. So that sounds kind of, help me, Chris, that sounds so stupid and nerdy.
So of course the CG is just where that fulcrum's lying, and I talked about it really on the center of lift. It's like that idea of what it's where the airplane is balancing, right? So it's the fulcrum, the CG, and then the datum is purely, I mean, it's like it doesn't really practically matter to us where they put the datum. It's literally because we're going to see here in a second, there's a slide coming up that we'll talk about. For a particular airplane, there's a spot where each station has a number, and you just use that for the arm. And the datum is just where the manufacturer decided to put it. Sometimes it's at the firewall, like in this, looks like a kind of like a Cessna. Like Pipers will often put it out in front of the propeller. It's like, you know, it just depends on where they decide they want to put it, and that's the datum. So you have to have some place, some reference to measure from, and so it's really not as complicated as it might seem. It's just so we can find our stations.
And the funny thing is I think it's complicated the first time you go over it, but it's kind of like riding a bike. You're like, okay, I remember that now. But the thing is, really, you know, I was reading those slowly intentionally, because if you just go slow with it, it's there. You know, I mean, it looks so nerdy and complicated. You're like, it's not. So here's the slide you were talking about, Chris.
Yeah, so here's just another good picture of that, where it kind of shows the reference datum. In this case, again, a Cessna, I know it happens to be at the firewall. And then they show the CG there, and it just shows the CG in reference from that datum. But really what matters is we calculate these things, and then in a second here, we'll be looking at just reviewing some charts. You compare it to the charts for the airplane. Am I within limits? Am I safe? If so, good to go, off we go. By the way, I see a good question here. One comment says most POH specs from Calvin I've seen are at sea level and at standard day conditions. Most of the ones, it's like usually the charts they'll account for density altitude, because they'll have the temperature columns, and that kind of is how they account for density altitude. So I know that for at least the ones I've looked at, which are typically like your Piper style, like a Seminole or 172, they'll have columns or some way to adjust for that temperature, which takes into account the different altitudes and all that sort of stuff.
Cool. So now, also, just so you know, there's actually a really good, and it's short, so you don't have to read the one of the things that we reference later. This link at the bottom, and you don't have to, it's a super long link, but if you go to AOPA.org and search for datum or center of gravity or weight and balance, you'll get this, and it's got some really nice diagrams there that'll just kind of help you read the story. And I think it's only about a page and a half, so it does fulfill all of your weight and balance needs in summary format. All right, let's move on.
Okay.
All right, poll. Let's run that poll.
Let's run that poll. So this is one kind of getting at, somebody asked about the pre-flight checklist earlier. They mentioned that, and it says, does your weight and balance calculation count as the W in AERO? And so just as a reminder, AERO is the acronym we can use for our pre-flight documents. So that'd be the airworthiness certificate, registration certificate, the second R's if you're flying internationally, that radio station permit, operating handbook or the POH, and then the weight and balance is what it says. So the question is, does the calculation that you do count And so select one of the following. Is that a yes? Is that a no? Not sure, stop trying to trick me, or I'm taking the 5th on this one. What do you think, Pablo? Any thoughts as you're perusing, not giving away the answer?
Without giving away the answer.
No, okay, that's all right. So this,
no.
the reason I put this one in here mainly because this is one that when I do flight reviews for people or do airplane checkouts, I will ask this question. And the only reason I started asking it is because I would fly with occasionally with people and they would tell me, oh, here's my, this is the deal. And I would say, oh, and so then I would clarify for them what it is. I'm trying not to give away the answer as we do it. So let's give people just a few seconds longer to fill in and see what they think. I like that we got a few people taking the 5th on this one, which is totally fine. By the way, we can't tell what you answer, so don't worry. We're not going to call anybody out.
Yeah, that's true. Darn, I was thinking, I was hoping we could.
You like to do that? Special award. All
That's
right, when we hit 75% there, let's go ahead. There we go. Yep. All right, so we got lots of folks saying yes, it does count, and then about 31%, so 58% saying yes, 31 saying no. I like the folks that are saying not sure, and I'm taking the 5th, which is totally fine.
You know what's nice?
Answer, Pablo?
The honesty. Well, the honesty in this is fantastic.
It is.
Sure. I love it. So thank you to that 7% that were honest. Yeah. So the amazing thing here is that you have to flip those in a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Ask the audience. The W doesn't stand for the weight and balance calculation that you have done, if you have done one. The W stands for the actual weight and balance of the aircraft.
And that's that document signed by the mechanic that says this is the weight, this is the CG, this is the the unloaded CG, the unloaded moment. That's what you have to. That's what you're looking for. So your calculation doesn't count for that.
That's right.
That's really common misunderstanding.
And the thing is where do you find that? So I know that for the aircraft that I have flown at my club here, it's usually, if there hasn't been anything added, like new GPSs and radios and stuff like that, it's usually in that POH, which will actually have your tail number for that airplane plus the actual weight, and it'll have all the dates. So that is something to look at. I know that there's one I'm going to be flying here soon, and when I was reading that POH, it had 30 pages at the front with all of the additions to everything on that aircraft. So they did keep that up to date. So that's one way to do it. What if they, this one I don't know, and this is an honest question, what if they've added something to a plane? Would it be in the, would they add, it's just an addendum to the POH, right? Like they'd put at the end or something?
Man, I'm not an AMP, but the basic deal there is that when they do something like make a change like that, the AMP can then, because it's signed by an AMP, so they can make a calculation. So they can say they took this out of this arm, and then they can make a change to that document. And so I'm seeing a few questions about this, people asking about it too. And so just to clarify, that W is if you go and read up on it again, or just double check, it's the weight and balance document. And what it literally means is that it's that certification from an AMP said we weighed the airplane, this is what the arm is, and that sort of stuff. And that's what you then use to make your calculations. You use that number to plug into your calculations to get it. And so that's what the FAA is looking for. They're looking for that document from the AMP saying, we weighed this aircraft, here's what it is. That's the one you're looking for. And then, like we said earlier, that the calculation that you do is, while not required, you are required to operate within limitations.
Yeah.
So, all right, what do we got next here, Pablo?
This is a good one now. Ready, everybody? Oh, the numbers. We're finally at the numbers, like a real live 172 weight and balance. So this is one of the ones, by the way, that you'll see at the AOPA site if you go to it, which kind of encapsulates the whole thing to make it easier to kind of like, W and B for dummies. Cliff's notes.
And really, it's a good review in case, because it's like it's like I said, you're not illegal flying if I'm flying in the same airplane. It's just me all the time, and I know I'm in weight and balance. You don't necessarily have to do that calculation because it hasn't changed. So it's a reminder of how to do that. I know for me, it's like I said, it's like I fly with the same student, and so then I get somebody else on board. I want to bring a passenger along, and now I'm like, okay, let's pull it out, let's do it. Let's do the calculation and see where we are. So it's a good reminder of that.
Yeah. And this one's, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there are some tricks to this that we're going to share in a moment, which is what I'm looking forward to, because it's like, for me, like an Cessna we'll look at, I don't bother with ARM because the Cessna gives me a way to cheat past that. I just do weight and moment, and just less math. I like to do less math if I can. So there are ways to get around that.
You had me at cheat. Let's do this thing. All right, so here's the actual weight and balance form. So the other one's basically completed, right? So this is what we were talking about. This is usually where you'll start at. So this is where you don't have to come up with the weight and go weigh the plane. That POH or the addendum or the AMP's note, whatever it is, the last weight, and that's the key here. Don't open it up and find the first one. I know that most airplanes, right, we don't have a 2020 Cirrus on staff here, right? Ours is like a 2010. Things have been added throughout, so that weight has changed. So you got to find the last weight, and so that's where you would start with this form and fill in the rest.
So and so the cool thing about this one too is that you can easily make a table. So it's like, this is actually a really simple one to do just using a spreadsheet. You can make a table up for yourself, and all it is you're adding, right? Adding up the one column, getting a total for ramp, weight, and moment, and then subtracting out. So even I can make this in a spreadsheet. That's how easy this is, because I'm by far, this, Pablo, how good am I with spreadsheets?
I didn't want to say anything. Thank you for opening the door. Yeah, well, you're not an expert. We'll just say that.
And so even I can make this thing in there because it's very easy. It's just weight times arm. You do your basic stuff. The cool thing about this is if you have that maybe on your phone or something, it makes it very simple and a very inexpensive. We'll talk about some other ways to get this, but really inexpensive, easy way to do it. You don't have to worry about taking your calculator and adding them up one by one. It just does it for you. And so we'll show some other examples of that as we go here.
Yeah. Now,
this one is the, I know that the 172, this is from the S model. I actually have the pilot's information manual here, like what would be the POH if it was the official one for the plane. And the cool thing is that a lot of airplanes will have this loading diagram, and this is useful because later when we talk about, and I saw some questions popping up in there, people mentioning things like ForeFlight and electronic calculators, that yes, and so you'll need to know the arms, this is that stuff with the arms, the station, for your airplane, so you can plug it into an electronic one, and that way you'll have it set to go. Or like that table that I made, the other one there, it's like you just need to know these arms to plug it in for the different stations to get your calculations. The other thing I wanted to mention here was sometimes, like I know in the Cessna, I often will have students working on this, and then of course fuel, like you mentioned earlier, is a big one. And they look on this thing and they'll notice there's no fuel anywhere on that picture. But you got to look at note number 1. So it will be in there somewhere. And in this case, it's note number 1. It says the usable fuel CG is 48 inches, station of 48. So that's what you use. And then what do you think, Pablo? Look, it says the seats are 34 to 46 on the front seats.
Yes. so yeah, wow. So that's well, that's interesting though with the pilot and passenger, right? Because I think it's not as easy as just saying, hey, look, pilot, passenger, right? I mean, there are times when, depending on who the passengers are, as PIC, pilot in command, you should not be afraid to ask someone their weight, right?
Right.
I mean, that's the calculation. I know that can be kind of weird. I know I've had, when you're flying with someone and you're like, okay, but that's important too, because they might have to sit in back, depending on who you are.
Yeah, and no kidding. And in fact, and in this case too, it's like often I'll have students ask me, of course, the reason it's 34 to 36 is because the seats are adjustable. And so my students will often ask, well, what do I do? And I said, well, normally what I do for an average person, I just call it 37 and call it good. But if you've got someone is really big, it's like you can probably figure that maybe I should think that they're farther back, take that in. But when you really look at an airplane like this, pay attention. This is a place where it's really good to pay attention. Pay attention to where you typically put it. Because I know for me, when I first get in, I put the seat all the way back so I can get in. But then I actually pull it pretty far, relatively far forward, or at least into that
really
middle range. Right, and I'm 6'1", almost like in between 6'1", 6'2", and I do that. So you figure that anybody that's smaller than that, in the mid 5s, they're going to pull that seat all the way forward, right? So it's like for the most part, you can get an idea of where they would fall, and you have to make a rough estimate. I mean, it would be a challenge to take a measuring out there and measure this, but I wouldn't go with that. But you just make your rough estimate.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I think for the most part, a lot of people I've flown with, they don't put their seat all the way back either, because one, if they did, no one could sit in back, right? You can't just do legs back, so they will be pushed forward. So a lot of this really matters visually, right? You're going to see it visually. You don't have to sit there and fill it out and go, let's see, if this person weighs 300, you're going to see it right off the bat.
Exactly. And remember,
so we do have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just remember the one point that I just want to refer when we talk later is this is where you would get the information for those electronic means of calculating it. So.
Now, one of the questions I just saw come up is pretty good because I don't think we cover it, Chris, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we included a slide for this, but someone says, suppose we want to remove the rear seats from an aircraft for cargo reasons, can the pilot simply subtract the weight and station out on the pilot weight and balance, or do we need to have an AMP sign off on the aircraft weight and balance? Good question.
That's a great question, and we'll just leave it at that. No, no. what I would do is I cannot give you a definitive answer on that because I do not know that off the top of my head. My suspicion is that you probably need an AMP to adjust your weight and balance, but I can tell you who to call. I would definitely recommend calling 1-800-USA-AOPA at our Pilot Information Center because there are AMPs that do work there on staff, and yeah, and they actually, most of the guys that answer the phone, I should say the guys and gals that answer the phone, they know so much. They get these kind of questions all the time. And so, in fact, what will happen is if I get stuck on something, that's who I actually just go over and talk to them or call them. So that's a good one. Like I said, my suspicion is be conservative, probably get an AMP to do that. But then I would check and find out because, maybe if it's something where you're taking, I know in like a caravan, you can take the seats in and out of it. So I'd imagine there may be in some instances for airplanes like that there's probably a procedure to follow. So I don't know, but I know that we at AOPA, we've got the answer.
So a quick question for you though is, and I mostly flew Pipers before this, and I know for a fact that there was a cargo chart in there. But it's been a while since I looked at my Piper because I haven't flown one in about 8 years. Is that do you know, Chris? Does the 172 have that?
What do you mean by a?
So when you, well, let me go to the next one. So on one of these, it wasn't this one, it was the, well, it was this one that had the cargo or utility. That's what I was thinking, sorry. Okay.
Oh, okay, utility category.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
so,
that's for like doing spins and stuff if the airplane's approved for certain maneuvers.
All right. Sorry about that. I was thinking different.
No worries. So remember I told you the cheat? This is the cheat. If your airplane comes with one of these, a loading graph of some sort, and I know that obviously Cessnas have them. I don't recall Piper's having them, but it's like I've no doubt that other manufacturers have them as well. But this I love because if you look at it, you come over and for example, pilot and front passenger, you find the weight of the two combined. So say it's 300 pounds together. You go over to the line that says pilot and front passenger, then you drop straight down. Love the mouse. Go ahead, Pablo, and drop it straight down. And you'll see that you're going to get something like 11,000 pounds for the moment. Or actually, in this case, they're all divided by 1,000. So you can just do 11 on your calculation. And it's all just knowing it's got that index of 1,000. I like this because there's no arm involved. It does it for me. And then there is one thing you can do here. It's like, well, what if, notice that it tops out at 400 pounds. It says, well, can you go more than that? You actually are allowed to. You would just have to go 400 and say it was 450 total. Then you do another 50 and add that moment to it. You can do that and then see if you're still within limitations. That is assuming, by the way, that there's not another limitation listed. For example, in a 172, there is a baggage area weight limitation. For one of the baggage areas, it says like no more than this much weight in that area. So just keeping that in mind. So there are ways. I love this loading graph. It makes it, if I have to do it manually, that's what I want. It makes it a lot easier to do it.
Yeah. And it's funny because this is actually better quality than the one in most manuals because they're from 1970. Hey,
no kidding. Yeah. By the way, we did have somebody, Barry, chimed in here and said the rear seat removal. He said a Grumman AA5. I'm not sure if that's a Tiger or a Cougar or which one, but has removable rear seats. And so yes, the pilot can make weight and balance calculations. AMP is not required. So I imagine that's probably in the POH then or something. It might talk about that. So yeah, so double check, but it seems like it might be something you can do there.
Yeah.
All right. So of course, this is just, I mean, I'm hoping everybody here, it's like we're all certified pilots, or at least I know the majority of you are. So I'm hoping you remember how to do these, but just a quick reminder, you take your, in this case, it's moment. And this is the one I would use with that loading chart. I don't have to bother with arm. I literally don't have to do any other than adding weight, get the moment, add up the totals, and then just find my total. Say my grand total is 2,300 pounds and my moment says it's 100. Again, it's 100,000 actually, but 100, and then I just find that. As long as I fall within a safe category, whether normal or utility, I'm good to go. Somebody asked, I saw earlier too, can you just, if you have fuel burn, right? Can you just draw a straight line between gross fuel and empty fuel, or the fuel you're anticipating on burning, and call it good? And in general, that's what I've done. It's like for a Cessna, you might want to check your particular airplane and just put in some sample numbers just, to try it out and see. But generally speaking, that should work, that you can go in that straight line kind of thing. And so it works out pretty well. So I always like to do a whatever max fuel I've got, and then I'll do it to like empty fuel. I figure worst case scenario is I run out of fuel. And then if I'm within weight and balance limits, then I feel confident that I'm good to go.
Also know that there's two separate measurements here. There's kilos and pounds. So just make sure you're looking at the right one.
Good point. Yeah, and millimeters too.
And millimeters, yes.
Yeah, how about that?
Very, very important. Okay, somebody, since we're talking about like the actual stuff here, and I don't think we cover it. One of the questions was about fuel. There it is. If you have to drain fuel, how do you do it? I have not seen it or read anywhere on how to do so. So I guess my question would be, building on that, is, are you talking about in-flight fuel burn? As far as I know, you can't drop fuel if you're too heavy in an emergency in a 172. So you'd have to fly around if you could to burn off some more fuel if you're too heavy on the landing weight. But before taking off, you can do it from the drains. So that's, I guess, how I would leave that.
Take a while. And I know that there is, if you were overweight that way, I mean, you can call, I think line service might be able to do it. I've heard it's a little bit of a process, but they can come and get fuel out.
I've seen it done. It's kind of cool. Yeah. It's just a drum with a, and then it siphons the fuel.
Does it go?
That's exactly right. All right, another graph. Thankfully, this is the last one, people. Hang in there.
Last graph. And so this one is a very similar method. This is if you had done the calculation with ARM, obviously, then you would just compare, you go to if you've done the calculation using the ARM for everything and got the CG for the airplane at the end, then you compare your weight on that left-hand side to the CG location on the bottom, and it's the same thing. Do you fall within limits? Again, doing max weight versus empty fuel or calculated burn, that sort of thing, and see where you are. But one thing to mention for both of these two is that, like in the 182, it's got a weight where it allows you to take off with more weight than you're allowed to land with, and that's something to be aware of, right? Because it's like I remember flying once, and an unexpected passenger showed up, and I was like, well, we're within weight and balance for takeoff, but we're gonna have to figure out we're gonna have to fly for this long before it's okay to land because we're too heavy. And so, because it can put too much stress on the gear. So be aware of that, especially as soon as you get into your higher performance aircraft. 172.
I mean, that's really not, I think when you're not a pilot, that's something that you're like, what? That's stupid, right? But take that into account, because especially if you're a student pilot and you're not thinking that way, it is true. We're not lying to you. Oops, let me go here. There we go. All right. Weight shifts. All right, now this is something that, here we go.
You're like, oh my goodness. Now, you can find this in the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. I should have left the page on it, but you can easily look this one up. This is one that we're about to show you guys some ways of doing this in an easy manner, right? Using electronic means. That's the way to do it. It's like, as I know, lots of people have been kind of jumping in talking about ForeFlight and everything else, and totally agree. I don't want to have to do math. I really want to, if I can avoid it, and make it easier for myself and make it faster, that's great, because it's like I don't want to have to be messing around with it. I don't have to do it. But this is a formula that I have not yet seen in one of those electronic things. I'm kind of surprised, because it probably is not that difficult to do, but I can't say that I've found one. And so this could be useful if you have an airplane and you're loading it and you define like, oh, you know what, we're within weight, but our CG is out, and so can I rearrange some of the cargo to move it? You can use this formula, that weight shifted, the amount of weight you are going to shift or how much you have to shift. You just put the X for whatever thing you're trying to figure out over your total weight versus the change in the CG, like how much do you need to move the center of gravity, plus or minus, and over the distance the weight is shifted. So we're not going to go through all the details here of how to do this, but it is in the Pilot's Handbook. This might be useful for you to do, and you probably could set up a spreadsheet that would do this relatively easy for you too. Just put that formula in so you can plug the number in and then find that out. But this actually is a little more efficient than the sort of almost like the hunt and peck. It's sort of like, well, okay, I'll move this here. Now redo the weight and balance and see if I'm within yet. This you can actually figure out and plan it. Like, this needs to go here. Once I do that, I know I'm within.
Now, one of the cool things is we'll mention here at the end is, and part of the resources is, like, every one of these sample charts, all of these calculations are all in one particular book, and I'll mention that shortly. Very exciting.
I think I added one to that slide.
Oh.
So and here's an example here. You got the aircraft total weight, you got the CG station where it currently is. You have the aft CG limit, so you can see that we're out of limits. And so then you put in the X where you want it to be. So in this case was how much weight do we need to shift to move? And you see how they put the 1 inch in? We want to move the CG by 1 inch. So how much weight do we need to shift? And then it's got the, the distance, the way to shift it if we move it this far. And so you have to move 65 pounds in this case. Then you can look and go, okay, I've got to move 65 pounds this way. You know, one thing I thought of, Pablo, is this is all bringing back a memory of having to fly. We flew down to Tullahoma a couple of years ago for a fly-in, and we took one of the 172s. It's an older N model, and it's 160 horsepower, so there's not a whole lot of weight that it can carry. So it was me and one other person, and neither of us were really like that big or anything, but we had a the combined weight we could take extra was 100 pounds. So if we had full fuel, we could carry 100 pounds of stuff. So it was like, weigh your bag, you get 50 pounds. It's like,
that's
so
exactly right.
The one thing that was interesting about that was it's like it did help me to become more of a minimalist when it came to packing.
No,
it's
sure.
Like I had to sit there and weigh it and kind of go, oh, am I under 50? Dang it, I guess those shoes don't go, you know, that kind of thing.
That's right. Well, and we get those black shirts. We have 5 of them. You get one. Nobody's going to know. All right, so let's get to the tools. And this is where we'll start mentioning some of the resources and stuff. So for any weight and balance for your plane, if you know how to do the calculations and what all the numbers are, you can create a spreadsheet. It's easy. The thing about it to be careful with is the actual functions and calculations that you input. I'll give you a quick example. At AOPA, we had one for the 182 I fly, and it was wrong. I'd used it actually a couple of times on some of the longer trips, and I didn't realize it until I actually went over, and I was like, I shouldn't be over. So I'm like, let's go. So I had to go in there, and then we had to change it. However, so that happens, right? It's little things. And so every little number, or big number in this case, you can see matters. And specifically because you're doing this, right? So we talked about the weight and balance and just knowing if you're within the normal CG. Cool, easy enough. But when you're doing this, you know, these charts, those numbers matter. And specifically this one here that tells you if you're within the range, that all matters because it tells you if you're over or not. And so you really have to make sure you do it right. So in this case, I won't recommend doing this, and I won't not recommend doing it. It is completely up to you. If you trust yourself enough, please do so. If you don't trust yourself, there's other ways to do it.
And if you're looking for how you would do something like this, if you decide that you feel confident enough in your ability to error check it and everything else and put the formulas in, you can just do a search for something like example, like create airplane weight and balance spreadsheet. I know that there are YouTube videos out there, there are websites that will walk you through how to do that. And so it's something, if you're kind of a spreadsheet type of person, like Pablo is, this is something you can relatively easily pull off. Like I said,
also recommend when you do the, sorry, Chris, when you do the search, like any doctor on a bad diagnosis, do a couple of them. Don't take the first one and go, oh my God, that was easy. Pick another one, see if the numbers match after those both calculations were done. Maybe do 3 of them. This is pretty important, as we said in the first 12 slides. Safety.
Yeah, we don't want to be dangerous on this one. And the one thing I will say too is that even if you don't do all the graph stuff, you know, all that sort of thing, you can make it's really easy without even having to have anybody show you. If you know the basic weight times arm equals moment thing and then just sums, you can make that basic table there. Really, that's simple to do. And then you just test it a little bit. And what you could even do is compare, like take a sample, do it manually, do it with this, and make sure they match, and then you'll know you're good to go. But yeah, that part is really easy to do.
This is just addition and multiplication.
Yep, that's simple.
That's really it. Yeah, and especially if you know these things here, because if you had maybe 2 airplanes or you had a flight club, a flight, not a fight club, you put all your weights here, and then you could just select which one you're going to use, and you don't have to type it in. And so that way there's no number errors. But all right, that's beyond that.
No, we don't talk about Fight Club.
That's right. That's the first rule.
First rule, weight and balance.
So here's a tool. Again, not endorsing this, but one of the tools that I use is there's Sporty's E6B tool, and this is on my phone, and these are actual screenshots from my phone. And you can see It's really easy, and this is what that spreadsheet does too. You've got all of your numbers, right? I mean, there it is. You plug it in, like for example, I take this and the numbers just plug in themselves as you go, as you put numbers in. So it's really cool. You can add new stations if you'd like, and then you get your total weight, and then it shows you if you're out of weight or not. You can see here. Things will turn red when they're not in range, and so forth. So it's really nice. It's easy. You do have to do some work where you have to put in the initial numbers. It's not a matter of it knows, right? Please don't take the standard of anything. Your airplane weighs different than a standard anything.
And one thing to note there too is that it's like sometimes that people get mistaken that the sample table or sample chart that's in the POH, like there's a sample weight and balance table. That weight and the arm is not the one for your airplane. You need to go look at the document for that weight and balance document instead, because that's just a sample when they stick in by the manufacturer. By the way, I have this one too, and the cool thing about this one is it does a bunch of other stuff too. So it's basically all the things your E6B will do. It does all of it all in one place. That's kind of nice.
It's so fantastic.
Yeah, it does work. All right, what's the next one there? We got a couple others, I think. Lots of folks mentioning ForeFlight. This is a great one too, because both that's a Sporty's one, and I know the ForeFlight one, they both will let you save one or actually save multiple profiles. So you can save it for each of the airplanes that you fly. This one's got the nice little graphical format too that'll show you that you put in you have to go and look at the chart and get the different coordinates for the limits, and then it'll do the same thing of that spreadsheet that we showed you. So this is
and the
nice.
Cool thing is, if you look at this one real quick, takeoff and landing. So that's your takeoff weight and your landing weight, and it shows you where are each of those based on what you put in for your numbers. So it's a really cool tool, and it's in English. 0 fuel weight, landing weight. I mean, you don't get a lot of that anymore, right? Baggage area. So, and then you got this thing. I've never used this. I don't know what that is, Chris.
That's a so this ASA makes this Cx3 calculator. This is an update. I have the old version of this. It's still using the black LED, like this black ink LED type. That's that. I don't have this newer one, but this one does the same thing. It's got a weight and balance. So there's lots of manufacturers out there that make stuff. These are just the 3 that we were able to, like, we knew about this. I knew that these 3 I knew about, and there's more. When we did a search on the App Store, tons of them on the App Store. Again, check them out. Check the reviews. Check your favorite pilot supply store. I'm sure they're on your other manufacturers that make them too, but they're very, very nice. So for the folks that were saying it's easier to do it electronically, totally agree, and that's exactly how I do it
100%.
too.
100%.
I do the math, but I don't want to have to do it.
That's right. All right, so resources. So I'm going to skip right to the second one there. Sure, we all know the P-hack. That's fantastic, but a little known reference. Did you know that the FAA actually makes a nice fall asleep tool called Weight and Balance Handbook? 114 pages of fun, or tons of fun, or quarter ton in our case, for example. I mean, 114 pages on weight and balance. I absolutely recommend it. I know it sounds stupid, but it's got every calculation, every chart you saw, the weight shift, everything. And so really, I mean, at 114 pages, it even has more than that. And I couldn't even tell you what the more is, but what do you think, Chris? Have you seen this book?
I don't know if I have the most current one, but I have a printed version of that book. Of course, that's because I'm a CFI nerd. But yes, and you can get these free as PDF free on the FAA's website, along the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. Does a nice overview, and if you just want to review the basics, but it goes into detail. It has like weight shift aircraft in there. It's got jets. I mean, anything you can think of, it's in there, and they've just taken the stuff in the Pilot's Handbook and said, okay, let's go into detail, and there it is. So,
and I think the coolest part is what you just mentioned, just in passing, which I think has to be pointed out. It's free. Free. 114 pages of go to sleep fun for free. Now, as far as I know, they won't send you the book. You can get the PDF though, correct?
Yes, PDF. You can download the PDF from their website.
Money. Yeah, yes. The book costs money. The PDF does not, but it's a super huge file of 114 pages. So tons of fun. I just have to keep saying that because it's fun. Tons of fun. Okay. And let's get the question. Oh my gosh. 11:59. I don't think we've ever been right on time. So we are at time, and we realize that. So a lot of people have to go at the hour mark. But we're going to do questions that have been asked. A lot of them we'll go back to, and we'll stick around basically as long as it takes to answer as many as we can. So let's start.
Do you want to just mention the next topic real quick before we do that, Pablo?
Yeah.
For those that might have to leave.
Sure. So next episode, February 11th, we are on a monthly schedule of 2021, 12 to 1 Eastern, more importantly, 11 to 12 Central. And Ace, your next check flight. So this is fantastic. We will have a special guest to help us here. Am I right on that, Chris?
Exactly right. Pat Brown, one of our ambassadors, and an FAA DPE, a designated pilot examiner. I know I changed the title of this on you because we were talking about it yesterday and it was check ride, but the reason I changed it to check flight is because we're going to talk about things not just for taking a private pilot or an instrument check ride, but also doing a flight review. If you have to do a stage check, anything like that, any kind of check flight, we're going to talk about things that can help you do well on those to be prepared.
And again, you glossed it over. It is Pat Brown, DP
Pat Brown.
Extraordinaire.
That's exactly right. All the way from Texas down there. DPEs are bigger in Texas. So
that's what I hear. Yes. All right, Steve, what do we got for questions here? We lost our producer.
Oh, nope, there's quite a few. So I was just getting over to the right screen.
Okay.
Time to see which ones we've addressed and which ones people still had. There was a lot of questions about usable fuel versus total fuel and how that weight is calculated.
Okay. Yeah,
so I think, I wonder if they mean, I wonder if they're getting at unusable fuel versus total fuel. And in fact, you know, here's one thing we did forget to mention. I know we had it as a note and I think we skipped over it. When you get to the definitions of the things when it comes to weight, arm, usable fuel, empty weight, standard empty weight, there's a huge list of different terms. Make sure you look at section 1 in the POH for the airplane. Section 1 will have a list of what that manufacturer, how they define it, and the terms that they use in the book. So if you've got you know, an airplane that's made in the past at least 30 years or 40 years, it'll have that section in there. Some of the really older airplanes may not have that. But when it comes to total fuel and unusable fuel, the unusable fuel, and you got to check your POH and see if they include it in the empty weight, because there's basic empty weight, standard empty weight, and they differ on what your airplane is using. But the unusable fuel is often included in the basic, or the weight for that. I know on the 172 that unusable fuel is included, and then you know how much you can use, and that's what you want to calculate for adding to your weight and balance. The unusable fuel normally you don't add, but you got to check the POH.
Cool.
See if your manufacturer includes it or not in that empty weight.
Stephen?
Let's see. Well, okay, there's this one. When calculating the weight and balance for load for the flight and then zero fuel load, is it adequate to draw a straight line between the 2 points to determine if weight and balance is okay?
Yep, I think I mentioned that one a little earlier. That is what I do, I know. And the way that I, you know, again, I'm doing it for the airplanes that I fly, like a 172, for instance, or a 182. And so I've gone through and I just double check, because that's like I was wondering that myself. And so I'll plug in using like the electronic ones, makes it easy, and just plug in various fuel weights and see if the line is basically straight. And and for those it typically is, then I feel confident like I can follow that. But just check your airplane, because it could be maybe if you've got an airplane that's got different fuel tanks, like if you're dealing getting to a more advanced airplane, you might have wing tanks and a belly tank or whatever, and so those may make a difference if you have different CGs. But if it's at that same arm, then you can just double check. So, but yeah, generally yes, but my caveat being, check it for your airplane and just do some sample calculations at full, 3/4, half, and so on, and just see how it goes down the chart, and then you'll be able to know with confidence whether or not it's going to be okay for you.
Cool.
All right.
Next.
We had someone who asked if you would discuss aircraft that take off in balance but become imbalanced with fuel burn.
So I think we discussed that a little bit earlier, right? With specifically something with big fuel tanks. I think with smaller ones like RVs and stuff, it's not so much of an issue, right? Because that's in the back anyway. But something like when you're carrying 45 aside, you're doing something longer. If you're 20 pounds off, it's over 100 pounds in weight on each wing that you're off. You got elevator issues possibly, but more importantly, you could have rudder and aileron. I mean, if you're totally heavy on one side, and let's say you're landing in a crosswind and you got to get the left wing down, but your right wing's super heavy, you're essentially negating whatever you might be doing with the aileron and rudder, and causing yourself some really terrible things that could happen. So that's important to know. I mean, that's definitely something that I think most people don't think of, because I think most of us are just doing, we're going to go around the patch a couple times, maybe take, 20-minute trip somewhere to get a burger, right? But anything longer than that with bigger fuel tanks, you got to take into consideration.
And then the other point being too, if you're talking about like longitudinal balance, then the key part there is making sure you do your calculations, which is why I like to do full fuel, no fuel, and then maybe I'll check the fuel for what I'm planning on burning, and then making sure I'm within limits on all of those. Because if you figure out like, oh, if I go to this level of fuel and I'm going to be out of balance, then you either need to change it, maybe use that weight shift formula, figure out how can I move that CG either forward or aft as needed, and or change the load, take stuff out. So make sure you're going to stay within limits. I don't want to become a test pilot in the air with that stuff happening. And in fact, you can even feel it if you have someone in the airplane and you have the seats are adjustable. Have somebody just move the seat and you'll feel the airplane move. So that CG makes a difference, and it'll totally take it out of trim.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you move stuff too far, then really bad stuff can happen.
Steven.
All right. It's a little long, so bear with me. The person's comment was, I drive a Mooney's 02, which has a max takeoff weight balance and a max structural loading weight and balance, which becomes important in many situations and requires additional planning ahead. But the guy I bought the plane from a few years back claimed he routinely flew cross country with 200 pounds over takeoff weight and said just add 5 miles per hour on takeoff and landings. I've never tried it, but is there a safety factor built into the figures that allows pilots to get away with this practice?
No, no, don't do that kind of stuff. If you want to get some sort of documentation from the manufacturer, like an additional thing where they've tested it, but I would generally tell you, I do not recommend that. I think that's it's like the way that the FAA gets, or the way when this stuff is certified with the FAA, they purposely put it where they are with that test pilot. So even though people may get away with it and it may work, it's like legally speaking, number one, that's not okay because you're operating outside the airplane's limitations. And the other part is it's like you don't know if it's been tested. So I don't think that's a great idea.
So Chris, do you know, and I think someone did ask before, do you know, is that max takeoff weight an absolute, I don't mean that, oh, can you cheat? But is there anywhere that's listed, I think this person actually mentioned it, that you can safely go about 10% over or something, on the takeoff and still be okay?
So,
I mean,
like if you,
again,
my general answer to that is going to be no. Now, is it going to happen? Like, have I probably flown an airplane that I didn't know? Like, I did my calculations, and everything said it was, but maybe like whatever I put in, I didn't realize there was more fuel than I thought. Yeah, has that probably happened? Probably, because I know that there are safety margins. Like I know that at least I've heard that there are safety margins for when they certify these things to keep us safe. But the point is you're supposed to be keeping it within those limits, and that keeps you within those safety margins. So I would say generally no, don't do stuff like that. I mean, why? It's like, again, I don't know. I'd say generally don't do stuff. Do better planning. Try to figure out so you don't do the stuff like that. Can't recommend that.
All right. Yeah. Well, I wasn't asking for recommendation, more of a general guideline.
Now,
Yeah,
I know that there are the manufacturer, because I know I've heard of things like in Alaska where people will they'll go get things where they can fly it so much over. But again, you need to talk to the engineers
Alaska.
or whatever. Yeah, that's Alaska. It's a whole different story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Steven.
there's a bear coming at you, whatever you have to do. So
yeah, I think there was a similar question earlier on in the presentation about, is it absolute or is there some fudge weight allowed with the calculations? So someone asked something similar along that line earlier.
Here's my thought on that is that there likely is some fudge allowed because we're probably not perfect in the weighing and all that sort of stuff. You know what I mean? So I have no doubt that there's fudge allowed in that. So that it's like figuring that we're human, we're probably going to mess things up or make mistakes occasionally, and so it allows for that. But what I'm trying to get is don't purposely do it. Don't purposely be like, well, I'll just do this and that way I can fly without it. I think that's a bad idea. But I have no doubt that if like you make an accident somewhere and it's a little small thing, it's probably not going to do anything.
Well, and I think that's a really good point, is maybe we don't know, right? I mean, it's not that we're fudging it intentionally, but something's off. Someone's 10 pounds less on their baggage and they weigh 10 pounds more than they told us, and stuff like that. But also, it's not just weight and balance and handling, but structurally.
Right.
I mean, what if you get into some kind of really bad turbulence and you're going that extra 5 miles an hour or 10 miles an hour than you should be? That can be a problem too, based on that weight that you're not even aware of.
And that's a really good point, Pablo, too. And especially you got to figure as airplanes get older and older, it's like you don't want to be consistently overloading them because now it's going to put more stress on the frame, and it's not built for that. It's not
Yeah,
designed for that.
exactly.
Yeah.
Even.
All right. This individual says, I practice short field landings by myself at an airport that is 300 feet shorter than my future destination to build confidence, but I plan to take a passenger to the destination. Can you explain why landing distance is extended with increased weight? My approach speeds on final are not changing because the stall speed doesn't change.
Good question.
Actually, well, I'm assuming that they've done a calculation like in the manual to know that, because normally stall speed will increase with weight. The heavier you get, the higher your stall speed. So unless you've got something in your POH telling you that at that weight there's no difference, your stall speed will be higher. And then the only thing I could think of is if they were somehow going out and doing stalls and said, well, it looks the same. It could just be that the calibrated airspeed or something is off. But the reason it's going to take longer to land and longer to take off is just basic inertia. You've got more mass you're trying to make stop with those brakes. And so it's just like, think of it in terms of stopping someone's coming at you like on a bicycle and you grab them and stop them versus a 18-wheeler coming at the same speed. You're not going to be able to stop the 18-wheeler because it's got too much mass behind it, too much force. So that's the basic reason why that would happen. So yeah, you want to give yourself extra room because the brakes are going to have to work harder. It's going to take you longer to slow down.
Yeah. Now, just to build on that, Chris, how about your speed? How's that changing? You know, are you coming in a little faster if you got an extra 250 pounds of weight? Are you coming in a little faster?
The way to calculate that actually is look in your POH, because a lot of times they'll tell you what the speed should be at a particular weight. So it'll tell you stall speed changes in most of them, and a lot of times they'll show approach speeds at particular weights they'll recommend. Now, what I'll tell you is, like for example, like in a 172, and I hate these 172 all the time. It just happens to be the one that I've flown so much and teach in all the time. I just know it really well. And in there, on the landing chart, if you talk about like short field landing, the speed that'll give you an approach speed, and you notice most of the time those landing charts are at max gross. So in reality, if you're less than max gross, you know, it's like you could potentially fly a little slower and it won't take you as long to do that. So it's like a lot of times they default to here's max gross. I think the Piper ones, they always have that little, it's those crazy lines that kind of go up here, go across here, come down here and all that, and they include the weight in there. So they're calculating that for you. But yeah, check your POH because it'll tell you what speed to fly.
Cool.
All
right.
Does the fuel moment arm change much on most training aircraft as fuel is burned? I figured the AMF POH would mention this, but I figured it's worth asking.
Yep, great question. And the like the arm, like in the for example the 172, it stays the same. That's where you can figure that out. Generally, I would say the answer is probably no, but caveat being, check your thing. So do the sample weight and balance we were talking about. Do it for full weight and little weight, you know, or no weight, no fuel or whatever, and then see if it changes. Look at the line. But yeah, that's how you can check. That's why it's at least a good idea to do full weight and no fuel or landing weight, so you can get an idea of what if you're going to be within CG for all those conditions.
All right. We had a couple of these at least along this theme. What about additional oil beyond the 6 quarts minimum? Most 172s can take 8, right? I don't see that on the weight and balance sample form. Shouldn't it be there?
That's a good point.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I'd have to go. Honestly, I've never been asked that, because usually we keep it right around 6, because if you put 8 in, it blows it out of the oil breather, and so we don't normally fill it all the way up. And it's like, and I think you can run on like a 180 horsepower one, runs on I think 4 or 5 minimum. So that's a good question.
Don't you think that, I mean, but the 6 is already taken into consideration on the weight
in the engine.
So if you add, and I hate to say it, it's a negligible amount of weight. I mean, first of all, you shouldn't be adding 8. Like you said, it just blows out the back. So what's the point in that?
Yeah.
Even if you went at 7 or just under 8, I don't actually remember how much oil weighs, but
I want to say it's.
I can't imagine one.
Yeah.
See, you know what I mean? It's like,
remember we were talking about those fudge factors and things like that. This would fall within that, right? We do these things and we don't. It's like we're not told to necessarily consider those things. And technically speaking, yes, you should, I suppose. But that's where that fudge, that's where those buffers are built in for follow the stuff that's in the POH. You'll be okay because they've already accounted for things like that, you know. But yeah, we'd have to go and dig into the definition and say, I want to say that usually the empty weight for like, I think it's, I'm careful not to misspeak here. I think it's standard empty weight, but I'd have to double check that, my definition there. But I think it includes full oil most of the time. So if you have less, then should you be subtracting a little bit? But again, how many pounds are we talking? I think oil is maybe 4 pounds a gallon or 4 pounds a quart or a gallon or something. I'd have to go look it up.
It can't be a quart. There's no way I'm picking up a 4 pound.
It's in the, yeah, you're right. It's in the pilot's handbook. I think it has the weight of oil in there and the weight of water.
I don't know, just super strong, which I wouldn't rule out. Okay.
I believe that, Pablo.
Steven.
Let's see. Well, is there a difference between zero fuel weight and the empty weight?
See, they're going to nail me down on this, aren't they? Sorry, let me look this up.
Yeah, well.
All right, so basic empty weight is the standard empty weight plus the weight of optional equipment. Standard empty weight is the weight of a standard airplane, including unusable fuel, full operating fluids, and full engine oil. So that's included, standard empty weight. The basic includes the all the stuff, all the equipment that's added in, anything that has been installed. And what was the other question there, Stephen? Was the other one they were asking for?
Oh, I'm gonna go back up. Hold on. I guess just between. Oh darn it! I've lost it. The thing keeps moving. There's so many questions. People are giving us calculations on weight though, on oil weight. It was.
Oh, cool.
Is there a difference between zero fuel weight and empty weight? So that was the question I was referencing.
It depends, and so it depends on what kind of empty weight you're talking about, because that's what I was saying was that there's really I'm saying empty weight in a sense of just keeping it generic, but there you have your standard versus basic empty weight. So your standard empty weight and your basic empty weight do not include the fuel, other than of course the standard empty weight. Actually, both of them include unusable fuel. So the zero fuel weight would be the same as your standard empty weight, or the same as your basic empty weight, depending on which one you're looking at, and then fuel is added onto that. So I think that hopefully that answers that question. And then again, look in section 1 of your POH, or if yours doesn't have that, then you can also look in the pilot's handbook. It's got definitions of all those terms.
All right. I put this one in here. Someone says it was a trick question. As some, not all POH, if original and issued by the manufacturer, can contain the weight and balance, same as from the A&P. So your added weight then changes the weight and balance. What proof do you have that you performed all required safety issues to make a safe flight?
Okay, so it sounds like, could they put the numbers in the POH? Is that the first part I'm getting there?
Yeah, I don't know if I read it with the right tone there. It's line 22 on the sheet we're sharing here.
All POH original. Yep. Okay, so then if you install things, it changes the weight and balance. I could believe that, like when you first get the airplane, it should come with a separate, like I know for all the ones I've ever seen, they always have a separate document from that. So it's like the POH will, I'm wondering what the person might be looking at. Could it be that the sample one, never use the sample one that's in there, because that's just a sample. Or it could be you buy a new airplane and maybe they filled the stuff in for you. And then anytime you change anything after that, you have to get that updated, by an A&P or whatever. And then
I'm
what
just
proof do you
curious
have that you
about that.
Go ahead.
That's the line I'm curious about, because you only have to show proof of something, and generally either extreme situations or if you a ramp check, but even on a ramp check, if you're just making a flight, they're not going to ask you for a weight and balance sheet. And then it also
they will want to see your weight and balance document though. They very well want to look at that.
But it also says, what proof do you have that you performed all safety required issues, which is, I think, past weight and balance. Now you're probably talking aero and a bunch of other stuff. So I don't know if this is actually
weather check.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and I think there's probably, without having a lot more to go on, that's kind of, well, you really can't prove it. You can't prove anything, right? I mean, you have no evidence. You sat in there with a piece of paper, and unless you go get it, and I mean,
yeah,
I don't know.
I guess it would be the thing was, it's like I would argue it this way. Like, say I got ramp checked, and say it was me and a 172 by myself. I've done it a bazillion times, right? I know I'm within weight and balance, and I get ramp checked. So I show them all the documentation, because I do actually check all those documents every flight. And then I always get a briefing too. So I got my weather briefing. I can prove that I did that. So then again, so I got my briefing. I did that stuff, and I went through all my checklist. I made sure everything, did my pre-flight, make sure everything's working correctly as it should be, or dealt with as needed. And they say, well, where's your weight and balance calculation? I'll say, well, I know it's within limits, and I can show you just by I can do it right now because I'm operating within. So that's how I would address that potentially.
So let me. I saw one here, Stephen. So let me steal your thunder for a moment. So somebody asked here, and I think this is an important one because it's not exactly right. So FAR 91.323 allows you to fly an aircraft in an overweight condition up to 15%. How would you calculate this? And knowing this, you can see the balance is more critical than overall weight. Now, I think this is where we have to look at these regulations with a certain amount of scrutiny, which is FAR 91.323 is for aircraft flown and registered in Alaska only.
And it's restricted category, it says too.
That's exactly right. This is not, if you read the whole thing, even the title of 323 says increased maximum certificated weights for certain, not all airplanes, operated in Alaska. Operated in the state of Alaska by, and then as any regulation, there's a 1, 2B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, C, D, and so on. So there's a lot of things that go into that. And it actually gives you a calculation, the way at which the airplane meets the positive maneuvering load factor, N, where N equals 2.1 plus 24, and anyway. So there's more to it than that. But this is something that, the rest of us in the 49 other states do not have to concern ourselves with because we are not allowed to fly by the FAA at 115% of our maximum listed weight in FAA aircraft specifications.
And by the way, I was mistaken. That was not, this one doesn't say necessarily restricted. I was looking at 91.313 that mentions restricted on operating limitations. But yeah, this is pretty clear. It says that you've got a limitation on the size of aircraft. You're up there. Yeah, there's some very things. This is what I talked about where they allow them to do that, which obviously shows that there are potentially some fudge factors there. But look, it says the administrator considers the structural soundness. I mean, this has to be approved basically.
Yeah. And by the way, let's say it's for part 121 and or part 135.
Right.
So that's very
going to be
specific.
Your freight and passenger carrying operations, that sort of thing. So it's not like for us to go, I'm flying my 172. I'm going to go do this. This is for people that are being certified by the FAA. They're being observed a whole lot more than the FAA, than we typically would be. I mean, how often do you see somebody from the FAA as a GA pilot? I mean, I think I'm probably a thing you asked me a month ago. So how many, have you ever gotten ramp checked? I've gotten ramp checked 3 times, but that's pretty unusual. I think a lot of people don't. I've never seen the FAA come out and ramp check them. So
yeah, right. All right, we are dangerously close to going to 12:30. Stephen, do you see any other questions? I mean, we could sit here all day, right? So I think at some point we'll have to put an end to this. That's exactly right.
I did have one question. I was looking through the list trying to find it, but I remember the general gist. Someone was asking about if we're using some like the electronic and digital things for doing your weight and balance calculations, but you do get ramp checked. How do you provide proof that you've done it? Like, how do you document it versus like handing your iPad over to the person to look at?
I mean,
you might be able to screenshot it and airdrop it to them, or like or email it.
But actually, let me ask you this though, Chris, and neither one of us are FAA people. However, if you get ramp checked and they ask you for a weight and balance form, that is not under the purview. You don't, by regulations, have to have a paper weight and balance form that you did before you took flight. So that is incorrect.
It says that you just
not.
It says that you have to do it within the limitations, as we mentioned. It was a 91.3.
That's right.
So operating within the limitations within there, and so you could just show right there. So yeah, and it's like if you needed to give them a copy of it without turning your iPad over or whatever, your tablet, then I would say just take a screenshot and you can email it or
and you saw my screenshot of the weight and balance from the iPhone, right? So you saw that. I mean, boom, those are 2 screenshots from my iPhone right there. So here you go. Don't touch my phone. Just look at it. I love the FAA with a joke. I didn't mean it negatively. So, okay.
So I hope I got the gist of that question right. That wasn't verbatim, but that was the general idea.
Cool. Well, we do have
Lots
to
of
end at
good, I
some
mean, there's
point,
lots of
although
questions too, so I'm sorry we couldn't answer
Yeah.
every one of them, but
yeah, and we love you guys. So keep asking, and if we didn't get to your question, we apologize. You can always send it to us later, and we can try to get to it as well. So thank you. Another great month. Chris, thanks. Stephen, wonderful to have you on board here with our questions. So we look forward to February 11th.
yeah, it's going to be cool. Ace your check flight. And don't forget, if you do have other questions as well, anything that comes up, call 1-800-USA-AOPA. They know so much. It's ridiculous. It's amazing the amount of stuff that those folks know. So give them a call and they'll be able to answer any and all types of questions.
Cool. Stephen, take us away.
All righty. Talk to you all soon.